Hi, everyone. As Brandis said, I work for Public Media Company, which is a national nonprofit that's been around for 25 years, and we're focused on helping local public media stations be more impactful, more sustainable, make more money, impact their communities, and grow. So you can imagine that this past year we've been very busy. But over our lifetime, we've been active in local communities around the country. Specific in Illinois, we've helped WSIU in Southern Illinois. We've helped our colleagues at Tri-States Public Radio, GLT, and even helped advise the merger between Chicago Public Media and the Sun-Times. So, thank you. And personally, I'm a Medill-trained journalist, so there you go. And also formerly of Chicago Tribune and Chicago Public Media myself. So again, it's another example of Chicago leading the country and exporting what it understands here to the rest of the nation. But for the past 10 years, I have been working on public media stations, and people who know what I do, when they look at me, they say, since July, how are you doing? How is public media doing? Are you going to be okay? And the truth is, the answer is more heartening than you could ever imagine. Because since then, what has happened at local stations around the country is their loyal viewers, users, members have stepped up and donated in significant manner, to the extent that most of them have replaced what the Corporation for Public Broadcasting gave them in 1 year. Thank you. At the same time, national program providers like NPR and like PBS are also talking to funders and raising funds for some of those critical programs like PBS NewsHour, which are expensive to produce. And so funders are stepping up there. And in addition, my company, Public Media Company, has gone out and with the help of what Chuck Todd called the VCs, but several other foundations as well as individuals and families around the country have raised over $70 million to give directly to local media stations at this time of need. And the way thank you, yes. And the way we're pushing this out is so federal funding ceased in July, and we pushed out in late fall $26 million to go to the most at-risk stations because they received more than 30% of their funds from Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And now we also have created an emergency fund, and that emergency fund will be to go to those stations that have some kind of catastrophic weather event or have some transmitter blow up or something that happens or, to some degree, suddenly get pushed out of the university that they currently operate in and because of lack of funding, and they have to find a new home. So we have funds to help them be sustainable and have stability during a time of transition. And then the final piece that we're about to do, and I invite my colleagues from public media to talk about, is we are funding a program for innovation. And this is transformative innovation to have public media stations and to some degree local community partners work in new ways to reduce potential back office infrastructure or shared services, to reduce costs in order to make sure that more money goes to reporting local news and information to that community or that state or that region. So that's the final step in this process is we understand that federal funding has ceased in its current form and it's not gonna come back, but we're acting with conviction and speed to make sure that the system survives. And so with that, I'm gonna invite up my colleagues to talk about what they're doing right now.
I want to start, just so that everybody in the room knows who we're talking to, briefly, if you all would, give us a sense of your station, your organization, of your work, what that looks like for you. I think maybe a lot of people in this room might be more familiar with some of us than others. So Heather, I'd like to start with you, please.
I'm Heather Norman. I'm the general manager of Tri-States Public Radio. We serve all or part of 20 counties in west central Illinois, southeast Iowa, and a little corner of Missouri. We have a very vast geographic region, and I am the smallest population center radio station in the state.
Hi, everyone. Sandra Cordova Micek. I'm president and CEO of WTTW here in Chicago, Chicago's public television station, public media organization, as well as WFMT classical radio here in Chicago.
Hi, everyone. My name is R.C. McBride. Shout out to two of my colleagues, Melissa and Ryan, from my stations are here, so thanks as always for your support. I am the executive director of WGLT, which is licensed to Illinois State University. We are the NPR member station for Bloomington Normal, and also executive director for WCBU, the NPR network station in Peoria, Illinois, that is licensed to Bradley University, and I also serve on NPR's board of directors.
I joined Chicago Public Media a year and a half ago, and if you couldn't tell from me like shouting that woo every time anyone mentions Chicago Public Media, I love this job. It's so exciting. For those of you who don't know, Chicago Public Media is WBEZ, Chicago Sun-Times, Vocalo, and hopefully more in the future. We have some exciting...
Care to break any news?
Not yet, but good reporting.
I tried. To my fellow reporters.
Yes, but we are so excited to be a part of the big experiment in public media and grateful to so many people in this room who have helped support us go through this wild, beautiful marriage between a newspaper and a radio station.
And I think all of us know it's been an interesting year to be where we are and to do what we do. And so I also want to get a bit of landscape from each of you about how your organizations have been impacted by the changes in federal funding. Melissa, you get to go first.
Sure. You know, we are hit hard by this, as any public media station is, but we also have to recognize that as a larger membership station, it's not as big as others have been impacted. It's 6% of our budget overall. And to Allison's point, we really have seen an incredible outpouring of commitments from members and funders who want to support us in this moment in time. That's good for now. I want to be very careful to say that. This is an annual problem that we're going to face, and so we need to make sure that we're continuing to engage and be committed to our members and our funders for the long term, but it's wonderful to see those folks step up. That being said, we also recognize how troubling it has been for stations who have seen much higher damage to their overall budget. There are some stations that have been impacted by 60%. And so this is a moment in time where I think that we're really excited and hopeful about collaboration. I think news organizations have previously been a little competitive, and we really are leaning into this idea that this is a moment not to be competitive with one another, but to be collaborative, because these stakes are so high and matter so much in this moment in time. So we're doing well. It's the future that we have to really figure out together.
So to give you an idea of the scope of our organization, we had been very much in growth mode. We had grown our combined staff to 20 full-time people, of which 11 were full-time journalists, plus a number of part-time journalists on top of that. With the loss of CPB funding, that's roughly 15+% of our budget. So suffice it to say, we are no longer in growth mode. In fact, much of the progress we've made over the last 7 or 8 years has been reversed. As a result, all those coverage gains, many of them have gone away. Now, our community, too, has stepped up like so many and plugged that gap for a year. But to my colleague's point, the sustainability is very much an open question.
Sandra.
Hello. Yes, we're similar to what Melissa was saying. Being in Chicago, we have always been a member-driven organization, meaning that the majority of our budget comes from our members, viewers, viewers like you, right? So we have always relied on the community, and I will say for news in particular, news at WTTW has the benefit of being a part of a larger PBS organization. The trust, the halo of PBS. So we do more than news. We do all the other PBS programming, history, culture, arts, kids, all of those other things. So the good news is there are benefits across in both directions, right? So in terms of resources, there's a lot that we can do, and we're strategically investing and continuing to invest in news because of the support of our members. So we're in a good place. We do have to continue to look at budgets and make sure that our membership and our supporters and all of our foundations and all of you in this room continue to be able to support us in the way that you have, and we are grateful for all of you. But we have to continue to look forward and see how we evolve. I think that's the theme. It's evolving. It's not public media contracting, it's public media evolving. So continue to look at all of public media evolving, including all of us in news.
Like everyone else here, our donors have really stepped up to the plate. We are a little bit different in that we experienced complete loss of appropriation from our license holder in 2019. So in some ways, I'm the battle-worn person. So we had already gone through a substantial funding loss. And then to have this hit, what that means is that any idea that we had for adding a reporter or moving is just put on hold. We're just trying to sustain what we have. So for reference, before we lost our appropriated funding from the university, our highest staff level was 14. We are now 6. We had 5 reporters. We now have 2. So, and a very vast geographic area to cover. It is impossible for 2 people to cover that geographic area. But we do the best that we can, and we've focused on 2 of our larger communities, our home base in Macomb, Illinois, and in Galesburg, Illinois, but still one person cannot get to every meeting that there is. And that is the reality of hoping to add a reporter before the CPB funding loss. That's just not going to happen. I also want to take a few minutes of my time to point to Public Media Corner over there at that table. So if you have any questions, all our colleagues are kind of around that table. Anyway.
Can I actually, Heather, you just reminded me of something. Heather's been such a great partner to us, like really convening all of the Illinois broadcast stations. I think it's important to note that while federal funding was a major blow, there are more challenges ahead for us. We are not out of the clear. There is still an ongoing FCC inquiry against public media stations that could result in our loss of tax exemption. There is a possibility that the federal government could take away our licenses, and that could be devastating for public media stations across the country. And so while we talk about while this year has been good, there are still challenges ahead, and we should not ignore the real problem that is facing not just us here in Illinois, but across the country, true resources for emergency broadcast systems, for local news, and it could get worse.
That's an excellent point, and I think, also I think everybody in this room understands, but I think there's the general public, they hear this news about the executive order and the court saying, you know what, that was wrong. That does not mean that money's coming back. That's not what that means at all. And so there are more problems than just the funding. And before we sort of pivot to, the call to action and what gives you hope and the solutions and what you've done to solve for it, I also want to get a sense of, for example, Heather and RC, you've said something to me similarly as well about losing reporters. If you've only got 2 reporters trying to cover such, a wide rural area, what does that mean for the people who live in that area and their access to news they might need?
So I think one of the things that people are really dependent upon that news. And in Macomb, for example, where there is, we had Gatehouse Media, completely gone. We're the only source of daily news. So people have hung on to that. That is one of the reasons why, as a very small station, people invest in us, because they depend upon us every day. And that's not just news on the radio. That's news in a newsletter. That's news on our website. We have a daily podcast that's 10 minutes of local news. So it's all that news that they depend on. And I would add, which Melissa kind of alluded to, as Illinois stations, we cooperate very well. So all stations pay in to State House reporting. So we share that, and that is housed at WBEZ. We share that reporting, at least the radio stations do. We don't have video yet, sorry. But those types of things we do together. And when we were going through this crisis nationally, one of the things that was shocking to me is there was a station, and I won't name the state, it was like, I don't even know who the other stations in my state are. So I felt very fortunate in Illinois that we had a wonderful working relationship, and we've really all come together to kind of meet this moment and talk about ways that we can increase news for our listeners, our viewers, how we can better serve all of our communities, because it is difficult.
I mentioned earlier that we had been very much in a growth mode, and to give you an idea of that, 7, 8, 9 years ago, we made a strategic determination, seeing what was developing in our community, that we would shift our priorities to our website, particularly in Bloomington Normal at WGLT.org, while not necessarily sacrificing the quality of our radio product. And we've been able to do that. And as a result, we've gone from 3,000 page views at WGLT.org a month, 3,000, to, in 2025, 5 million at WGLT.org. And this is in a community of 200,000 people. So people care. Thank you for that. People want to know what's going on in there. You all know that. They want to know what's going on in our community. The issue we're now facing that is tough is culturally within our own staff, we're a smaller team than we were a year ago. And our community is now holding us to this higher expectation. And guess what? Those journalists are holding themselves to that higher expectation. So I've had to talk to them several times about, I don't expect you to continue to do that level of work. It's just not possible. You were 20, you're now 13. So I mean, that excites me that we've got people that care so much, but I'm very worried that we're going to start burning people out and losing people.
Sandra?
Just to add, part of the expectation, I think, for public media has always been that in addition to reporting, there's also listening, convening, conversation. I mean, how many community conversations?
Yeah.
I know, Brandis could be on this panel as well, because community conversations, our head of community engagement is here. You know, we have talks, we invite schools in. So there's a lot of dialogue that has to happen, and listening, and, you know, and again, broader beyond news, we in the rest of the company are also in Chicago public libraries on a weekly basis. We have families, so we touch a lot of different parts of people's lives, and then we understand and listen to hear what's important in their lives, so that there is a two-way dialogue. And so thinking about public media in that way, that it's not just reporting out, right? It is that conversation and that sense of an obligation to have civic engagement. We're being held to that standard when, you know, funding is an issue, and we are trying to work with what we have, but we get support for those kinds of initiatives when we do those things. And I think that is a differentiator.
Thank you. Yeah, my news director and I, we spoke to 2 school groups in the studio this week alone. So I guess I also want to talk about, like, in response to this pivot that that we've all, I think, had to make, we're adapting, of course, what are your teams doing differently in response to this? And that could be, your team, your development team, if they're doing something differently, or obviously your news teams, are they doing something differently as a result of the changes that we're just going to have to live with? Melissa, you get to go first.
Thank you. I tease this a little bit, but we're really working on a big project this summer that we're so excited about, and I think
I'm dying to know what it is.
I know. It starts actually with what you're saying, Sandra, is this idea of I think that we have basically taken journalism products that are very valuable in people's lives, a newspaper, a radio station, a television station, and just put them online in the same format. We have never adapted our products. We have never dealt with the reality that people are taking their news and information in new ways. And we have to recognize that we basically ceded the convening, the conversation, the community to a bunch of social platforms that do not center civic purpose and civic discourse at their heart. They are for-profit technology companies. They're great businesses, obviously. They're doing very well. But there's also a backlash in this moment. There's a lot of younger people who are nervous about big tech companies. They are concerned about the future of AI. maybe one of the most disturbing quotes I heard is that we built social media platforms that created loneliness, anxiety, depression in teenagers, and then we built AI chatbots to be their friends. And I mean, it's a really disturbing status. And I do believe, and this is why I'm so excited to be here in Chicago, is that local community matters so much. Being able to know your neighbor, to be able to connect to your neighbor. We saw this in COVID. We were living in a globalized world where we were celebrating the fact that we could find out information anywhere at any moment in time across the world. And then suddenly your life literally depended on your neighbors. And we have to learn from that moment. We have to recognize how we have to build connection. And journalism was always a place of convening. It always has been. It always was, but we gave so much of that away. And so how do we really reconnect our work to our neighbors? How do we think about that in a digital sense? How do we think about that in a real life sense? And that to me is like the most exciting opportunity because everything is being disrupted right now. AI companies are coming for the major FAANG companies. They're all struggling to figure out Facebook, Amazon, Google. They're all trying to. Google's great though because they love us. Thank you, Google.
Thanks, Google.
Google and Apple. I will say, I will shout this out. They're the two companies that really actually do care about journalism in a real way. I'm not going to give the same credit to Mark Zuckerberg. Sorry, Mark. I'm not sorry. But there's an opportunity where they're struggling with their own business models, and so we can step in and say, hey, what mistakes did we make 10, 15, 20 years ago, and how can we rectify it? And to me, it comes down to that convening community place.
RC, and sorry, I want to hear your answer to this, but I also want, because I know your team tends to lend a little bit more digital first than most, and so I'd also, in your answer, I'd like for you to include a little bit about what that looks like, and do the rest of us need to figure out, because most of us are TV first or radio first.
Yeah, I think I always hesitate a bit to answer that question because I think, and I'm a big believer in local, clearly we all are, and communities are different. And what works in Bloomington Normal might not work in Peoria, might not work in Chicago or Carbondale or Macomb, but there are some similarities. So I hate to just say, well, it's as easy as deciding that we're going to replace the local newspaper. That worked in Bloomington Normal, that might not work elsewhere. But I will say, to your point, it is, I mean, I'm an old radio guy. It is a cultural change. So I hope that answers your question, but maybe not. But I will, to go back to the earlier question about, what are our teams doing, I will tell you what they're doing that I love, and this is true with our amazing development team, our amazing group of journalists, our folks that keep the office running. They are fighting. They are fighting every day. And we all know in this room there was a big victory last week by NPR and PBS to have that executive order ruled unconstitutional. And no, it doesn't bring the money back, but it is still a big blanking deal that we fought to protect the First Amendment, and it's not about this administration, it's about any administration saying that, no, I don't like what they're doing, I don't like what they're saying, they can't have any money ever. So I think it sets an important precedent, and to Melissa's point, there are more fights ahead. It's hard, it's draining, but we've got to keep doing it.
Yeah, I'll add that at a time like this where you feel like you need to be doing everything, you actually can't be doing everything. So you have to pick and choose and make really important strategic choices and get more focused. Especially, I know this is happening in the newsroom, right? You'd like to be covering every single thing. No, you're saying we are going to focus on, as an example, right, investigative reporting, investigative journalism, enterprise journalism, or you're going to focus on a specific area, specific beat. You're going to say, this is what people want from us. We're going to cover these kinds of stories. I think I've seen hard choices be made about what you can cover and not cover based on what you feel is important because you can't cover everything. And so I think I love that we're having to make these choices even though they're hard because I think it makes the work even stronger. So while we want to do everything we can't, And I do think, and I'm looking at my news director there who says, yes, we want to do everything. But sometimes those choices actually make the quality of the work just even better. And so you're leveraging all parts of the business and you're saying, well, this story goes across, and then you're looking at what did you accomplish? What is the impact in the community? So, and I can say, I sit on the PBS board nationally. PBS is having to do the same thing, right? What are the choices you have to make, and how do you get even more focused and deliver the quality? And I think we're not willing to sacrifice on quality, so.
Yeah, PBS NewsHour had to cut their weekend programming
They did.
earlier this year.
And that was a really hard choice. And they didn't want to cut the NewsHour on the weekend, but they wanted to make sure they could still continue to do that. And they're still going to continue to do Frontline and all the other aspects of news. But it's a hard choice.
What I would like to say is I've recently become a broadcast engineer. Yes, you wear more hats. That's one change. But the real answer is you just become more intentional about what you're doing. You think hard about the impact. And one of the things that really suffered when we lost our initial funding loss was outreach. So one of the things I have been is trying to bring our community outreach. And as I'm sitting in this room, and as RC can attest to, is that my brain never stops. So I'm sitting here thinking about, as public media, we have a lot of cachet already in the world of community engagement. What can we do to help increase awareness about media literacy, about trust in media, that I think we have a real role there, and it's something that I've been thinking about a lot. It's come up a lot in this room. It's come up in a lot of conversations with my listeners and just outside in the general public. That's one thing that I've been talking about. Be become intentional about what you do. So we have done some new things. You know, we've canceled some things, but we've also added some things. We've added things that we think that our audience would like, and we've decided to put resources there. So it's really just about examining what you have. I think long-term, I think you said public media evolving. It's evolving into how do we become more sustainable as a statewide collaborative. We're looking at many things, but those conversations take time. So deciding, and people have varying degrees of being able to participate in those. So we've really started those conversations, had some very frank discussions about what does it mean to collaborate, where can we collaborate, where can we not collaborate. We still want to remain local in our communities. We don't want to become, I grew up in Nebraska, I love Nebraska, but Illinois is a very different state. You know, I don't want to be Illinois news, you know, that it's all Illinois. We still want to maintain our presence in all those communities. How do we do that? How do we lead the way in showing that you can do that across the nation?
We've got like, I don't know, 8 seconds for each of you. I'm not so good with the math. Pick a question. What gives you hope, or what's your call to action? Heather, you go first, please.
What gives me hope actually is, and I'm not kissing up to you, is all my colleagues. They have been wonderful to work with. They've been great battle partners. And then also just the fact that people ask me, how are you doing? They don't have to care about the fact that we lost our funding, but they do. And so I think that's important.
What gives me hope is what we've heard from the community. And I don't just mean listeners and viewers and members and funders, but just everyone who has reached out to us and said what the work that we do means to them in their lives. That gives me hope, because it means you're essential in somebody's life. So that gives me hope.
The community, the outreach that we've had from the community, the way they have stood up to support, and also I will say the energy and professionalism in this room gives me hope. So nice job, folks. I feel really good being here today. And the call to action is, of course, please support your local public media station.
I'm going to go about this in a little bit of a roundabout way, and hopefully I don't insult anyone on the stage with me. I think public media has not had to change as rapidly as it should. And a lot of other news organizations and startups and national organizations have had to change because of the pressures of the environment that they're in. And that's good and bad in a number of ways. But public media does have to change. We have to change because what's happening right now is that great, trusted, reported information is too often locked up behind paywalls. And what's free is misinformation, pink slime, confusion, and public media is the space where we can truly provide great information without having to create an information divide in this country. And thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
And so this crisis, we are in a crisis moment. It breeds creativity. It breeds opportunity. It breeds a community recognizing the value of what we create, and it allows us to push forward on change. So what I'm excited about most is that while this is a scary, difficult moment, it also means that we can really affect real change. And I hope and I believe, working with all these folks on stage and many of you in the audience, that we can do that. And I truly believe that Illinois can be a solution for the rest of the country. So I'm thrilled about that.
Thank you so much. Don't let a good crisis go to waste, right? Like said one politician. Please help me thank our panelists. Thanks to all of you for joining us.